Good evening. I will speak, of course, in English. I have no idea about your language. I don't understand anything. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's an experience, and because I'm not only a researcher, I'm also a journalist. Nowadays, to be in Barcelona is quite an experience, I have to admit. I mean, it's interesting. It's not that I'm going to express my view about, yes, independence, no independence. It's not my business. I cannot tell you something that I'm not really familiar with. The point is that so many times when I am covering the Israeli-Arab conflict, I hear so many views of people who have no idea what they are talking about. They just have no idea. Full of lies, full of lies. I'm not speaking about views. Views are legitimate. It's okay. This is my book, Industry of Lies, about how media and academia manipulate, lie again and again about the Israeli-Arab conflict. And again, I do not care about views. It is legitimate. Israel is a democracy, and you can find all range of views, mainly, by the way, against the government. Fair enough. But when people lie, and I'm speaking about scholars, we have a problem. So actually, we have two wars. We have two wars. Generally speaking, yes, it's asymmetric war, a kind of asymmetric, but it's not one war. It's two wars. One is the military war, you know. I'm not going to speak about it. We are all exposed. The other one is the propaganda, which is very crucial to the battlefield. You cannot understand the modern wars without understanding the propaganda war, which has a very critical, a very crucial role in every modern war. Just for example, some years ago, and I was a peace activist, I read an article of an Israeli scholar, journalist. He's writing regularly for Haaretz newspaper. This article he published also in London Review of Books, which is a very prestigious magazine. And according to him, gas chambers, I guess when you hear the two words, gas chambers, it rings a bell. Gas chambers, we are speaking about the Holocaust. We are speaking about extermination. Gas chambers are not the only way to destroy a nation. He is writing it about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. It's enough to develop high rates of infant mortality. Wow. I read this article as an Israeli. I said, what? This is what we are doing to the Palestinians? Unbelievable. Are we behaving like the Nazis? And many people like to compare. I went in that time, in 2002, it was not so easy. Now, each one of you can take his mobile phone, third generation, and put infant mortality among Palestinians. We will receive the results in a few seconds. In that time, it was not so easy, but I found the data of the World Bank. And what I found is that infant mortality among Palestinians decreased dramatically, just the opposite. Just the opposite. Which means that what he published as part of the propaganda war was a blood libel. But he is a Jew, he is an Israeli, he is publishing all over, he is publishing in Israel, he is publishing abroad. But people don't know, because when a scholar is publishing that kind of stuff, they believe him. That's what Israel is doing. Wow. By the way, the journal, London Review of Books, that published this lie, never retracted. You can still find it now. And it's going on and on and on and on, like Professor Juan Cole, the president of MESA. MESA is Middle East Studies Association in the United States. A very important professor. And he published an article that according to the 9/11 Commission report, the official report of the Congress about what happened in the 9/11, Al-Qaeda conceived the attack as response to Israeli attack on Jenin. Well, let me tell you, I went to the report, the Congress report. It's open. Each one of you can go and see it. The word Jenin does not appear. Does not appear. He invented it. Now, the point is that it was not mentioned. I'll tell you why. Because the Jenin battle was the year after the 9/11. But we are speaking about an article of the president of MESA. A blatant lie. And it's going on and on and on. A Norwegian writer, the most important writer of Sweden, we call child murderers, which means the Israelis, we, child murderers. We do not recognize the state of Israel to exist. You know, let me tell you something. I guess you know what I'm talking about. To say about Jews, child murderers, it has a history in Europe. It has a history. And to use those two words, it has a meaning. And it's going on. Robert Fisk, he is an expert to the Middle East. He published several books. And in the middle of the first Gaza war, cast lead operation, he published an article. When we hear the Israelis say that the terrorists are firing rockets into Israel, the Palestinians in Gaza can say in many cases, well, my grandson is firing rocket at my town because before 48, these areas would have been Palestinian property. First, he's giving a kind of justification to the Hamas, to the terror, to launching rockets to civilian populations. Second, it's very interesting because when we are speaking about what happened in that time, in the 40s, and before, immediately at the end of the First World War, the Second World War, a huge population exchange took place. My grandmother arrived 100 years ago to Israel from Yemen. Now, she was a refugee. She never defined herself as a refugee, but she was a refugee. Like many Jews who were persecuted in many places, not only in Europe, not only in Russia and Poland and Germany, but in every Arab country. Now, they were expelled. The only one place that they could go in that time was Eretz Israel. She had no idea what is Palestine because it's very interesting because the name Palestine was not used not by Jews and not by Muslims. It was used by Christians, by the Western world, but not by Jews, not by Muslims. It's an old Roman name. But she arrived to the only one place that Jews were praying 3 times a day, which is Eretz Israel, which means the land of Israel. But she escaped. She was a refugee. Now, what is trying to tell us Fisk? That I have the right to launch rockets to Sana'a in Yemen? Or that so many people who became refugees in Europe have the right to launch rockets to the places where they were born and were forced out? Only in Europe, after the Second World War, 20 million people were forced out. I mean, do they have the right? Jews who were expelled from Egypt have the right to launch rockets to Egypt? But that's what he is writing. It is part of the propaganda war. He is justifying who? The Hamas. Hamas is part of the global jihad. They are not looking for peace. They are not looking for solution. They are not looking for two states for two peoples, which is fair enough, by the way, to strive for. But no, he is justifying the Hamas that is launching rockets because as part of their agenda, they are saying publicly, openly, we have to exterminate the Jews. And it's going on. A professor from Columbia University published an article saying, Tel Aviv is not the only Western city that does not have any Arab or Muslim inhabitants. I guess some of you were in Tel Aviv. Well, let me tell you, my doctor lives in Tel Aviv and he is an Arab, he is a Muslim. He has no idea. Thousands of Muslims live in Tel Aviv. He has no idea what he's talking about, but he is a professor that is teaching his students about the Israeli-Arab conflict. And he also said that Netanyahu, after Netanyahu gave a speech in the UN General Assembly, Netanyahu called to expel the Israeli Arabs. Well, I went to the speech in the UN archive of what Netanyahu said. And the only one sentence that Bibi Netanyahu said about the Arabs was the Jewish state of Israel will always protect the rights of all the more than 1 million Arabs. I mean, just the opposite. It's very interesting because in the debate that I had in Columbia University, I had to tell the panel, I will never forgive you that you forced me to defend Netanyahu. And it's going on. It's going on. Claire Short, she was a minister in the British government. The oppression of the Palestinian people is the major cause of violence in the world. Wow, I didn't know that we have any connection to what is going on in Darfur or in Congo or in China or in Myanmar. I didn't know, but she knows. To put all the blame on what? On Israel. She even blamed Israel in the global warming. What is the connection between Israel and the global warming? I have no idea. But when people are obsessed, that's what they are saying. And it's going on and on. I don't have time because I asked from the organizers 7 hours. They told me that I don't have. So I have my very limited time. I might skip some. Or sometimes it's simple lies. Gaza village flooded as Israel opens dam gates. Wow, you see what we are doing to the poor Palestinians. We open the dam gates in order to flood them. The only one problem is that there is not any dam in Israel. There is not. But why not to publish lies? And yes, there is a genocide threat. You know, in the curriculum to high schools in Britain, it's a new research that was published only this week. They speak a lot about what happened before, I guess it was mainly your lecture in the time of the issue. They did not mention this person. Who is this person sitting with Hitler? This is Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti. He was a leader, actually, of the Arabs in Palestine. And he collaborated during all the 4 years of the war. He lived in Berlin and he collaborated with Hitler. I mean, the main obstacle to achieve something, a kind of solution between Jews and Arabs, yes, there was a conflict. But he was, of course, against it because he supported the extermination of Jews. Main obstacle. He's not mentioned. He's not mentioned. And in so many universities in the West, I'm afraid that also here. I mean, let's delete some part of history in order to manipulate not only the public opinion, but the students. And that's what they're doing. I mean, how can you ignore the role of the leader of the Arabs? I'm saying the leader of the Arabs and not the leader of the Palestinians. You know why? Because in that time, nobody defined himself as Palestinian but the Jews. My parents, who grew up in Palestine, they were Palestinians, and they had ID card of Palestinians because of the British mandate. Arabs, in that time, did not define themselves as Palestinians. It came much later, after 67. But people don't understand it. Actually, the Jews were the Palestinians in that time, in the Yishuv time. It was your lecture. But people don't understand it. And it's going on. Yes, there was a conflict. Yes, Jews emigrated to Palestine because they were persecuted, not because they wanted. Not because imperialism, just the opposite, because so many national movements wanted independence. So they had to fight against empires. The whole national idea is anti-imperialist, because you are fighting against an empire in order to achieve independence based on the basic right of self-determination. But in a very manipulated way, they turn Zionism to a part of imperialism. Manipulation. And it's going on. The Arab League Secretary General, Abdul Rahman Azam, in 47, when the partition resolution was accepted by the UN, 2 states for 2 peoples. By the way, in the decision, you find a Jewish state and an Arab state, not a Palestinian state. Because as I told you, nobody defines them, because Palestinian state, it means for the Jews. It's confusing, I know, but in order to understand it, you have to understand the definitions of the time. Anyway, an Arab state, and fair enough. But it was, sorry, I don't know, it's jumping by itself. But the response of all the Arab delegates of the Arab state was a total rejection. You cannot understand the independence war or the 48 war, you can call it as you want, without understanding what happened. What happened is, yes, it was accepted by the Jewish issue, by the Jewish leadership. It was totally rejected by the Arab world in that time. Don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that the Arabs, Palestinians, now do not have the right for self-determination. I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it. This is a political issue. For myself, yes, I'm supporting the right for self-determination. It's my political view, but it doesn't mean that I have to manipulate history or to ignore history. I respect their aspirations for self-determination, but I don't have to manipulate history. Anyway, he declared this will be a war of extermination. You have to understand the atmosphere. My father was in that time a soldier. And yes, they were afraid. According to the intelligence reports of the Americans and of Britain, they told the Jewish leadership, don't declare independence because in few weeks you are going to be defeated. And defeated, the meaning is extermination. The meaning is extermination. And we are speaking about 3 years after the Holocaust. But Ben-Gurion, who was a leader, decided upon, yes, we are declaring independence. We are taking the risk. And they did. But nobody knew in that time what is going to happen. The outcome was, by the way, the Nakba. Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, that many of them became refugees. But in that time, let me remind you, population exchange and transferring of population was the norm, the international norm that was recommended even by the international highest court. Not now. Now it is a war crime. But we have to go back to the atmosphere and to the norms of that time in order to understand what was and what was the norms. And anyway, totally forgotten. We are speaking about the Palestinian refugees, and rightly so, yes, they became refugees. But you cannot ignore the fact that a bigger number of Jews became refugees and were forced out or escaped from Arab countries because of the same conflict. All their property was confiscated, totally forgotten, totally ignored. And it's going on. And we are coming to the 67 war. 67 war, people say again and again, well, Israeli imperialism, expansion aspirations. I mean, what are you talking about? In the years before 67, the Arab League decided upon extermination. There was not any occupation in that time. No territories, no Palestinians. They decided upon extermination. Hafez Assad, in that time he was the defense minister of Syria. We have resolved to drench this land with your blood, to throw you into the sea before 67. It went on with the president of Egypt. It went on with the president of Iraq. Same kind of declarations. And Ahmed Shukeri, who was a head of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, before Yasser Arafat, 3 days before the war began, he declared, whoever survives will stay in Palestine, which means the Jews that will survive. We have to thank him. How nice of him to tell us that after the war, he will let us survive. But in my opinion, no one will remain alive. It's just in order to understand the atmosphere. And yet, you hear so many scholars and journalists speaking about, the Israeli imperialism. You have no idea what was the atmosphere. I was, in that time, kid in elementary school. I do remember myself digging in the soil of our backyard because we had no shelters, we had nothing. We had nothing. So we had to defend ourselves because of the declarations of extermination. And it's going on and on and on, you know, the Hamas charter speaking about extermination of Jews, speaking about, you know what, let's hear it, because they're not speaking only about extermination of Jews. I have news for you. They're speaking about extermination as part of the global jihad. And I'm sure that this video that I'm going to show you now was never broadcasted. Not in Catalonia, not in Spain. Why? To expose you to the real nature of the Hamas.
ربنا ويا مولانا ويا سيدنا اهزم أعداءك وأعداء الدين في كل مكان اللهم عليك باليهود ومن هاودهم والنصارى ومن ناصرهم والشيوعيين ومن شايعهم اللهم أحصهم عددا واقتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم أحدا.
Okay. When you don't know it, you think that the Hamas is fighting for freedom against the closure, against the siege. Again, it's a manipulation. But let me admit, they are defeating Israel in the propaganda war because most people think that the Hamas is fighting for freedom, for liberation, for the end of the closure. Not at all. They can have it tomorrow. And it's going on and on. I mean, it's not one video clip, many video clips of the Hamas repeat the same kind of idea. And this is what they tell their children in the children programs. Extermination of Jews. And it's going on and on and on and on and on. And when you go to scholars in the West, for example, Arun Gandhi, the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, he published an article saying, we have created a culture of violence. Israel and the Jews are the biggest players. And that culture of violence is eventually going to destroy humanity. Israel is going to destroy humanity. I mean, it's the very same idea of the Nazis, the very same idea, when they again and again published the big lie. It's called, by the way, in the literature about the Nazis, the big lie. That's how it's called. The big lie was that the Jew is a great danger to humanity. In that time, it was expressed by the Nazis. Nowadays, it's expressed by the most enlightened people, but the same idea. And it's going on and on and on and on in cartoons, and now we have the BDS, and let me remind you that the BDS is supported by the municipality, the council of Barcelona, for example. Do you have any idea what you are voting for? I mean, I'm not asking you because, do you have any idea? Because the main aim of BDS is not peace and not the end of occupation and not anything of that kind. They say it publicly. The real aim of BDS was to bring down the state of Israel, extermination, or how it is called in social sciences, politicide. It's not a genocide, it's a politicide. That's what you're voting for. What is happening to the enlightened people? What is happening to liberals? At least try to find out what you're supporting. Because you're not supporting human rights. You are supporting a kind of extermination. But they vote for it. And it's going on and on and on and on. I have to skip because we don't have time for all of it. And then we are going to a kind of criticism which is much more legitimate, I have to admit. Not everything that is, when Israel is criticized, it's fair enough. I don't have, I do it myself. Don't tell anybody I don't like my government. So fair enough, we do it. And during the last rounds against the Hamas, protected edge operation and the cast lead operation, people criticized Israel and they said, well, you have the right. You have the right to defend yourself against the Hamas. Decent people. I'm speaking about decent people, not liars. But not the way that you do it, because it's very disproportional, the way that you retaliate against the Hamas. And I skip it because we don't have time. People like Bernie Sanders, Israel indiscriminately killed 10,000 Palestinians. It's a lie, it never happened. But it's part of criticism. And you find out Israeli journalists that are really popular in many newspapers in Europe. Israel's real purpose in Gaza attack is to kill civilians. Wow. And the most terrible document against Israel was the Goldstone report. Maybe some of you heard about it after the cast lead operation. And 600 pages that you did not read, I did. It was a nightmare. But to conclude it to one sentence is to say Israel intentionally killed innocent civilians. Wow. I corresponded with Goldstone in that time. And he was very nice. He always answered me. Immediately after he published the report, he interviewed again and again in many media channels. And he was asked, and fairly so, the same kind of questions. Journalists asked him, look, many civilians are killed in this kind of asymmetric wars. Why do you blame Israel? That Israel intentionally killed innocent civilians. The same questions again and again. I want you to hear not me, but him, and what is answering.
You know, the U.S. in its war on terror carpet bombs Afghanistan and Iraq and hurts innocent civilians. Is the U.S. then guilty of war crimes?
Well, certainly if war crimes were committed, of course they should be investigated. Any war crime should be investigated. And, you know, I don't with respect accept your description of what they did. It's something obviously I haven't investigated.
He was asked about the US Army, and he said, I did not investigate. You know what? Fair enough. He did not investigate. He was investigating the Israel-Hamas conflict. Fair enough. Okay. But then he was asked the same question by an American journalist, and listen carefully, because he has a new answer. It was 3 days after.
Israelis claim that if you hold them to this standard that you've just described, that law prescribes for conflict, any democracy that's fighting terrorism is likely to find itself dragged into an international court of justice. I mean, do you consider that a valid concern?
No, absolutely not. Take the United States fighting wars in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They have certainly at a high level gone to extremes to protect innocent civilians.
Wow. 3 days before, he had no idea about the US Army. 3 days after, he conducted a new investigation that nobody knows about. And now he knows that the US Army has gone to extremes in order to protect innocent civilians. Very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting because if you go to the chief of the US Army, when he was asked, in my limited time, I'm not going to show you the video, when he was asked, he said, when I want to know how to protect innocent civilians, and he knows something about wars, I send my officers to the Israeli army because they protect innocent civilians more than any other army. Two military experts that know something and checked the numbers claimed that the IDF takes many more precautions than are required, setting an unreasonable precedent, which means other Western armies cannot follow the Israeli army. And the same was said by Professor Michael Schmidt, which means that Israel is taking the most precautious in order to prevent any damage to innocent civilians, but they are killed. And I keep on, and what the Hamas is doing actually is he is using children. He is launching rockets from civilian populations. He's doing it again and again. And an Italian journalist who was in Gaza, he testified. He published it, not me. He tweeted, we got a sense of how careful Israel was to avoid civilian casualties during the airstrikes in Gaza. The Israeli army called one guy we met and spent 45 minutes on the phone with him, getting him to evacuate his neighbors before they blew up a Hamas media building next to his. But you don't hear about it in most media channels. And it's going on and on and on and on. But in order to understand how many innocent civilians and how many, or as it is called, combatants and non-combatants were killed, let's look. I mean, I checked the facts in another way that nobody did before. What I did is very simple. I took the age distribution in Gaza. Here is the age distribution in Gaza. And then I took the publications of the Hamas, not of the IDF, not of the Israeli army, but of the Hamas. Every day they published how many people were killed, the age, the gender, and the place. And I created the age distribution of the victims. I know it's terrible to do it, but in order to refute the claim that Israel is intentionally killing innocent civilians. And here is the outcome. You can find out that most of the victims are men, not women, in the fighting age. It immediately contradicts all what Goldstone said. I also checked, and I mean, the Hamas, even those children who were killed, and each one of us is sorry about it, as a human being, I mean, the Hamas admits we used women and children as human shields. And it's going on and on and on and on. I have to get to the end, and then we are coming to the last peaceful demonstrations. This is a peaceful demonstration, but that's what you do not see in your media. I mean, that's what they carry, the swastika, again and again. In order to understand the atmosphere, I'm skipping because we don't have time. I did one more thing. Sorry, because my time is limited. I checked, following what Goldstone said, I checked how many combatants and how many non-combatants were killed in every battlefield. And the outcome was, I'm skipping, I'm going to the last graph. The outcome is that Israel absolutely, of course, but even proportionally, killed much less than in any other battlefield. So what I did was, I sent a letter to, an email to Goldstone, and I told him, look, Mr. Goldstone, you were completely right when you claimed that the US Army went to extremes to protect innocent civilians. Yes, they did. But look at the numbers. You can refute what I'm saying, but I'm counting on what you published. Look at the numbers. The outcome is that the Israeli army went to the extremes of the extremes of the extremes of the extremes in order to protect innocent civilians. Maybe, just maybe you were wrong. It was the first time that he did not answer me. He did not reply, as I expected, by the way. But I have to say that, not because of me, but because of many other reasons, he published an article saying, if I had known then what I know now, the Goldstone report would have been a different report. He retracted. But out of the 100% that were exposed to his report, about 5% were exposed to his retraction. People don't know. People take the Goldstone report as a Bible, even if the head of the chairman of the committee retracted from what he said. I have to tell you something. It's not political. It's factual. I want people just to know, because they are manipulated. We are living in an era of fake news, of misinformation. We have to know it before we express our view about any conflict, and in particular about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you so much for listening.